Well, it's an honor to be here with Tom because he is a solar leader, I think we can say safely, someone who has brought us to the next generation of solar, and it's very exciting. And I think it's important to talk at this time because a lot of people have trepidation and fear about what's happening with solar. So I thought before we even started this conversation, Amy gave you a nice intro, but I don't think it gave you full justice. Can you tell us, just before getting into the future, which we're going to get into, talk about some of the barriers that have been broken in solar in the last couple of years, including the fact that it's now cheaper than oil for generating and gas for generating energy in California?
Yeah, so exactly 10 years ago, we actually built the first solar power plant that was cheaper than fossil fuels, 2015, so 10 years ago. And that was really a turning point for the industry where the folks from the fossil fuel industry took notice that solar at scale was becoming a real competitive force. Before it was kind of seen as a, San Francisco foo-foo based, people, this is kind of cute and the right thing to do, but it became a real power, no pun intended, in the industry. That's 10 years ago. Then the next milestone, I think, was maybe 4 or 5 years ago. We designed a power plant that not only delivered cheap energy, but it delivered 100 times more reliable energy than a gas plant.
So let's talk about that, because when the oil and gas industry wants to denigrate renewable energy, it always talks about reliability. Like even the failure during the Texas winter storm, which they all blamed it on renewables, and it turns out it was a gas failure. So talk a little bit about that reliability, because I think it's very important.
Yeah, a lot of people don't realize that. But if you look at FERC data, a gas plant in the industry is called availability, meaning when can the plant actually produce power. On average in the United States, a gas plant has an 85% availability. That is equivalent to your cell phone not working 1 day a week. You would look at your phone and say, like, that is a piece of crap, right? If it wouldn't work 1 day out of a week. That is the reality of a gas plant in the United States.
Things are just breaking,
The technology is very different, right? If you have a gas plant, and if you think about power failures, blackouts in California a couple of years ago, they always happen on day 2 or 3, right, on the heat wave. Those machines, when they run for 2 or 3 days continuous, they start breaking. And all it takes is one cooling pump to fail, and you have to shut the whole gas plant down. And that's exactly what happened in the blackouts. The gas plants on day 2 or 3 started failing, and the power grid couldn't deal with it. A year ago, we were getting very close, but we now had enough energy storage and solar power plants in California that actually kept the lights on. If you look at solar on the other side, it's a highly modular technology. It is a bunch of solar panels. You can throw a hand grenade in there and you may lose 1% of production, but the plant keeps on running. So even if you have failures in this modern new technology, which is basically a silicon chip-based technology, it keeps on working.
Even in melting heat?
Even in melting heat. And that is fundamentally a very different type of technology. And how often did your cell phone with batteries, et cetera, not turn on?
I love this. We're going to start telling the gas companies we need more solar for base power load. It'll be good.
That is exactly right. And that's what we designed 4 or 5 years ago for Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. And the plants that we had developed power about 17% of Los Angeles now with highly reliable power. We guarantee over 99% availability. That is contractually guaranteed. Our technology, and when I say our, this is solar energy storage, that combination built into a system, is just fundamentally much more reliable. And that wasn't true 10 years ago. 10 years ago, solar when the sun shines, and people laughed and said, like, you can't run an economy when the sun shines only,
Right.
But we now power 24/7, and we just did that. And the latest power plant we designed came online for Amazon data centers just 2 weekends ago. 1 gigawatt 1 gigawatt of power delivered fixed volume, fixed price for 15 years in a row, every day, fixed volume. So think about that. So it doesn't matter if it's a cloudy day or not, you can now develop technology that beats fossil fuel in cost and reliability.
So then we come to this point where I think all of us believe that and know that solar has been this huge success story. And I think it's a story that everyone in this room loves to tell. But then we have part two, which is the IRA is under attack. It looks like, we don't know, that the Senate will agree to gutting any supportive provisions. And then additionally, you have tariffs coming out of China, which has been so critical to providing the materials needed for solar. So what does that mean? Is that a threat to the solar revolution? I mean, we've brought the costs down, but now some of the supportive structure of that is going away.
So it's obviously not a good thing, but I view it as rocks on the road. Just this morning, I read an article that the cost of oil produced in Texas went from $46 a barrel to $62 a barrel over the last few years. That's a 35% increase in cost. The cost of solar has gone down about 70 or 80% in the last 8-10 years. So if you look at the curves, fossil fuel, which is, a bunch of steel and labor and drilling holes and transporting stuff, that keeps on getting more expensive over time. The cost of solar, which is a silicon chip technology, it's like your memory chip in your phone or your digital camera, how many megapixels you have. It keeps on getting better, faster, and cheaper. It's a silicon chip technology. You can't stop that technology. And so these two curves cross over. And if you take away the ITC, that point moves over depending on where you are. And to be honest, our power plants perform really well, but they're also in really good locations like Southern California, Nevada, et cetera. If you're up in northern Michigan, that cost curve is different, right, for solar. So you just move the pointer on, but you're not changing the fundamentals of these curves are crossing each other. And they cross each other at different places, different times. So taking away the production tax credits for factories being set up is a real disaster in terms of attracting industry to come, and then 2 years later you kind of blow it up. But in the big picture, it's rocks on the road, and you can't stop that train.
Well, that's incredibly exciting. But I think the thing that I thought was most exciting in our discussion before this is what the future looks like and how technology is actually going to make solar even cheaper. Right? So you've already brought it down to cheaper than gas. But what's really exciting, I think, is how innovation and customizing it for the load that, whether it's a city load or whether it's Los Angeles or a different city, and customizing the solar plant to the place can change and bring that number down. And I was hoping you could speak to that.
Yeah, so what we're doing right now is the third generation solar power plants, where we're designing power plants basically with software at the core. Very similar approach to what Tesla has done about electric vehicles, right? If you think back, they didn't invent electric vehicles. I had a Nissan Leaf, 2011, I think, something like that, And, they took a car and they threw a battery in the trunk and an electric motor in there and called it an electric car. Yeah, it was fine, but it wasn't really actually very good. As a car, was kind of crappy. And then Tesla said, if you have an electric propulsion system, you have to start rethinking the entire system. You have to start putting a 2,000-pound battery in a vehicle. You have to redesign the entire chassis around it, the electric propulsion system. And so they rethought the entire way you do a car. Number two, they also said, we're going to build this car around software, right? We're in 2000, back then, wherever they were, 2015, they built a software-centric car. No car manufacturer had done that before. Everything that they had was, software layers on software layers of old stuff that, they had over 180 processors in an old car to do all the stuff from your turn signal to your GPS, and everything was run separately. They said, we're going to design the entire car around software. And number three is they started looking at data. They looked at how do you behave in your car. We're doing the same to power plants. We're like, who is our customer? We're designing our power plants around software. We're designing it around the load. And it's very different if you power a data center that has a very flat load curve, or if you power a city in Southern California, like Los Angeles, where you have the peaks when there's a lot of air conditioning load. The design architecture for a power plant is very different. You can optimize the power plant significantly with software.
Well, so using those two examples, just explain how you might optimize for a data center versus Los Angeles. What would you do differently?
Yeah, so the system architecture and the topology on how we design both everything from the solar systems to the energy storage systems to how they interact with the systems of our customers is very different if you have to provide power at the same level, let's say at night, for a data center versus a city where the peak today, what they call the net peak, is in the late afternoon when the sun goes down and all the rooftop solar stops producing, but the air conditioners are still running. So the way you design the system to service that load is very different. It's just like if you're designing an electric truck, it's very different for Amazon than it is for an electric race car or fun car.
Right.
Very different kind of system.
And with that kind of customized design, does it save money?
Absolutely. It is better, faster, and cheaper. So you end up with a product that serves the customer better at a lower cost.
So we're down at, what is it, 4 cents a kilowatt hour at the best case scenario?
We're, with all the energy storage and everything, yeah, we're easily down in the 4 cents a kilowatt.
Could we get lower than that?
Absolutely. Remember, it's a silicon chip technology. It keeps on getting better, faster, and cheaper just because there is, if you look at a company like, I just saw that article last weekend, BYD, the Chinese battery manufacturer, has 122,000 engineers working on their battery technology. 122,000. You can't stop that train. This stuff is getting better and better and cheaper and better in performance every day. Just think about your iPhone in terms of the picture quality it takes, right? It's amazing, right? It blows your mind. If you think back 20 years ago, digital photography was barely there. Film was the way to do it, right? One of my big things, and I said that on Monday, is we don't have to kill Kodak to think about making digital photography better, right? We have to focus on how do we make our clean energy systems better, faster, and cheaper every day. Let's start running. And yes, there are rocks in the road, and that's not great. But we will win this race, and let's not worry about the other guys.
I love that as a place to end, but since I still have 2 minutes, I just have to ask you about your other innovation, which I thought was amazing, which is it's not just the chips and it's not just designing the load, it's integrating the entire plant and rolling it out as a concept instead of lots of different pieces. And maybe you could just briefly address why that's going to be revolutionary.
Yeah, so traditionally, we've thought about energy generation and the load as two separate things, right? The load, we knew what it was going to do, and we basically threw the energy over the fence, right? And we said, I sell you this much energy for this price, right? But if you start integrating the systems together, like take a data center, right? Data center, 40% of the energy is used for cooling. You can start thinking about strategies where you say, I will cool my data center on the solar peak, right? In the middle of the day when the energy is near free and every rooftop system, everybody produces, I can now pre-cool my data center. And then when energy gets tough in the late afternoon, I can let it coast. And you can do the same for a cold storage plant or any other stuff where you can work together with the customer systems. And now you create an optimized system that uses the energy more intelligently and, by the way, supports the grid in a way where you now have additional energy available for the grid to be more resilient. So instead of being a drain on the grid, these data centers can now become a support and a resource to the grid for better energy stability.
I want to thank you, Tom, because I think a lot of us, this is giving me new energy and excitement about the future. So better, faster, cheaper. Thank you for doing it for all of us.
Thank you.